Hi everyone. Today I'll be covering Chapter 8 from the textbook on everyday memory. There is a YouTube video posted on Canvas from a 60 Minutes episode, and many of the topics that are covered in Chapter 8, specifically those on eyewitness memory, are illustrated in the video as well. Information from that video is also going to be fair game for the exam. So I want to start the PowerPoint by talking about flashbulb memories, which are vivid memories for the details surrounding the time when a person first learns about a surprising, emotional, and consequential event. The first question we might have is what sort of events trigger flashbulb memories? That is, what do we mean by a surprising, emotional, and consequential event? For Americans, some of the most common events in history that have triggered flashbulb memories in people are things like the assassination of JFK or Martin Luther King Jr., the Challenger explosion, and of course the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Next, let me clarify that flashbulb memories aren't memories about the details of the events themselves per se. So it's not a vivid memory about the names of the hijackers or the types of aircraft used in the September 11th attacks. Instead, they're memories of the events in your life surrounding the event, such as where you were, whom you were with, what you were doing, etc., when you first learned about the event. So again, depending on how old you are, you may vividly remember that type of information about the September 11th attacks. The main question I want to discuss about flashbulb memories is, are they special? That is, are they different from or remembered more accurately than regular memories? What we're going to do is to look at evidence to support both sides. Evidence that suggests flashbulb memories are more vivid and accurate than regular memories, as well as evidence that they aren't. So first, we'll look at evidence that flashbulb memories are special compared to regular memories, that is, that they are better remembered. The first study to ever look at flashbulb memories was by Brown and Kulik. In their study, they asked people about the times when they first learned of significant events in U.S. history, like the assassination of JFK or Martin Luther King Jr. What they found was that even long afterwards, people reported clear memories for these events, details of when they heard the news, where they heard the news, what they were doing at the time, their immediate emotional reaction, and what they did next. Memories for these types of events thus appear to be highly resistant to forgetting, and Brown and Kulik suggested that a special mechanism, what they called a now print mechanism, essentially records and stores the details of these surprising, important events very accurately. And again, this is why flashbulb memories seem to be better remembered and to be more vivid than regular memories. In another study, Conway et al. Found that people remember more information about personally relevant emotional events. Specifically, they measured the amount of information that British versus American participants remembered about the resignation of Margaret Thatcher, who was the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. Presumably, her resignation announcement would be more surprising and important for British people than Americans, and accordingly, they found that British participants remembered more information than American participants did about her resignation. So overall, these studies suggested that flashbulb memories are more accurate and vivid compared to regular memories. However, none of these researchers actually measured the accuracy of people's flashbulb memories, nor did they directly compare people's flashbulb memories to memories of regular events from around that time. So this brings us to evidence that flashbulb memories are just like other memories, that they aren't special, and that they're susceptible to forgetting just like regular memories. One such study by Neisser and Harsh found that people's flashbulb memories for the details of when they heard about the Challenger explosion changed over time. The Challenger space shuttle broke apart 77 seconds after lifting off from Cape Canaveral, Florida on January 28, 1986, killing the crew of 7 on board, including a school teacher. In this study, participants answered questions about the explosion a day later, such as what they were doing when they first heard about the explosion, and then they answered the same questions 2.5 to 3 years later. Here's the memory for one participant a day after the explosion about where the person was when they first heard about it. I was in my religion class and some people walked in and started talking about it. I didn't know any details except that it had exploded and the school teacher students had all been watching, which I thought was so sad. Then after class I went to my room and watched the TV program talking about it, and I got all the details from that. And now here was the same person's memory of the original event 2.5 years later. When I first heard about the explosion, I was sitting in my freshman dorm room with my roommate and we were watching TV. It came on a news flash and we were both totally shocked. I was really upset and I went upstairs to talk to a friend of mine and then I called my parents. The key point here is that this person's flashbulb memory has changed over time. The account this participant gave immediately after the event is different than the account that was given 2.5 years later. And responses like this one, where the participant first reported hearing about the explosion in one place, like a classroom, and later remembered first hearing about it on TV, were fairly common. For example, right after the explosion, 21% of subjects said that they first heard about it on TV, but 2.5 years later, now 45% of subjects reported first hearing about it on TV. So overall, this suggests that flashbulb memories aren't immune to forgetting or are all that different from regular memories. In a similar study by Tallarico and Rubin, the authors found that flashbulb memories for the September 11th attacks showed similar rates of forgetting and accuracy as non-emotional memories. The researchers examined participants' memories for their experiences of the September 11th attacks and their memories for a non-emotional event that occurred right around that time. For both memories, participants were asked questions like, where were you? Who were you with at the time of the event? Things like that. And participants were asked these questions about these two events on September 12th, and then during follow-up sessions 1 week, 7 weeks, and 32 weeks later. As you can see, the main finding was that participants' memories for the September 11th attacks were no more consistent than their memories for the everyday event. That is, both types of memories show decay and decreased accuracy over time. This again suggests that there is nothing special about flashbulb memories, that they are susceptible to errors and misremembering like all memories. However, the authors also found that participants were more confident about the accuracy of their flashbulb memories versus regular memories. That is, people believed that their memories for the September 11th attacks were more accurate than their memories for the everyday event. Specifically, participants were asked to rate how vivid their memories were, and vividness ratings for the flashbulb memory were higher than those for the regular memory. So again, people seem to think their flashbulb memories are special, but they don't seem to be any more accurate than regular memories. At the same time, similar studies have found an advantage for flashbulb memories. This study was described in the textbook, but to summarize the results, the researchers found that subsequent recall of the emotional memories were more congruent with the original report than memories for an everyday event from that same time period. Also, 35% of participants couldn't recall the everyday event 1 year later, while everybody remembered the September 11th attacks. So to summarize whether flashbulb memories are special or not, what the research suggests is that memories for details surrounding emotional events are not stored perfectly and often not any better than memories for regular events. People do forget and misremember details of their flashbulb memories, just like they do for memories of everyday events, and so we don't need a different mechanism to account for the supposed accuracy of flashbulb memories. Having said that, some research suggests that there might be an advantage for flashbulb memories. And if that's the case, how can we explain it then? Well, here are a couple explanations. One is a general benefit for recall of emotional memories. That is, emotional memories just tend to be better remembered in general than non-emotional memories. Another possibility is additional retrieval attempts of those events compared to everyday events, and that would account for them being better remembered. This is called the narrative rehearsal hypothesis. It says that we remember more information about these surprising and consequential events because we rehearse or think about these events more often than everyday events. That is, we all discussed our experiences on September 11th with our classmates, parents, and friends, more so than with most events in our lives. And as we discussed, extra retrieval improves memory. So this explanation says that the reason flashbulb memories are sometimes recalled better than non-emotional memories isn't because we have a special mechanism to encode and store flashbulb memories, it's because we retrieve and remember these memories more often, and any memories you retrieve often will be better remembered. I want to switch gears now and talk about eyewitness memory, which is one of the other big topics of Chapter 8. I mentioned on the Chapter 7 PowerPoint that it's best to think of memories as being constructed. What I mean by that is people's memories are based on what actually happened, plus additional factors such as one's knowledge, experiences, and expectations. You'll see lots of examples of this when you read Chapter 8, such as when you read about the War of the Ghost study, the effect that schemas and scripts have on memory, pragmatic inferences, and the misinformation effect. And I'll cover this last one on the PowerPoint as well. But what all of these have in common is that participants make memory errors based on things like their knowledge or expectations of what normally happens in a given situation. The other chapter we cover this week on forgetting has more examples of the constructive nature of memory, that it's affected by people's opinions and biases, etc. Overall, the point here then is that memory is not about making an exact copy of events, but that memories are encoded and stored based on prior information. This is similar to what we talked about with perception, that perception isn't about making a copy of something in the environment, but is affected by top-down information. Anyway, in regards to eyewitness memory, the question we'll try to answer is, why do people make errors in eyewitness testimony? The textbook discusses a variety of reasons: errors based on suggestions, errors based on how people focus their attention during a crime, errors due to familiarity, etc. On the PowerPoint, I'm going to talk about some errors with police procedures that increase the rates of inaccurate eyewitness memories. But first, let me talk about the misinformation effect, which says that post-event information, such as suggestive questions, can alter one's memory for the original event. The way it works is that people witness an original event, and then after the event, they are provided with misleading information, such as suggestive questions by the police. Then, when they are later asked about the original event, they provide incorrect information about the event based on the misleading information. In other words, they basically incorporate the misleading information about the event into their memory. So for example, let's say you witness a convenience store robbery. That's your memory for the original event. A little while later, you're interviewed by a police officer who asks you, did you see how long the perpetrator's knife was? This is a very suggestive question because it implies that the perpetrator had a knife, but you may not have remembered seeing a knife. Nevertheless, your memory for the event is now tainted by the suggestive question. And so your response, either at that point in time or when you're interviewed a few weeks later, might be something like, oh yeah, he had a really big knife, maybe it was about 10 inches long, when again, you never actually saw the knife. So again, your memory for the original event was tainted by misleading information that was presented after the event. The original study on the misinformation effect was conducted by Loftus and Palmer. In it, participants are shown a film of a car accident and then were asked in a leading question to estimate the vehicle's speed. Specifically, different participants were given different verbs when asked how fast the cars were going. Some were asked how fast were the vehicles going when they hit each other. Others are asked how fast were the vehicles going when they bumped each other, or collided, or smashed each other. The graph shows the estimates people gave about the vehicle's speed based on the verb that was used, demonstrating how the misleading information biased their response. That is, those participants that were asked a question in a way that implied that the vehicles were traveling faster gave greater speed estimates. To further see whether people's memory for the original event was affected by the suggestive questioning, a week later, participants were brought back into the lab and asked whether they remembered seeing any broken glass at the accident when there was not any. Here were the percent of participants who said yes for the two groups. Those that were asked how fast their cars were going when they hit each other, so 14% said yes, and then the percent that remembered seeing broken glass in the smashed group, 32% of participants said yes. Again, it's important to note that there was no broken glass in the video. And so the key result of the study was that more people said they remembered seeing broken glass when the leading question implied that the vehicles were traveling faster, with smashed versus hit. Again, the obvious connection to eyewitness testimony is that if the police officer asked the witness if he or she saw a knife when the witness didn't actually see one, this suggestive misleading question may affect the witness's memory and cause them to say yes. Now I'll discuss some police procedures that affect eyewitness memory, the first one being about the type of lineup used. So, whenever you watch a crime movie or TV show like Law & Order, especially an older movie or episode, and they have an eyewitness participate in a lineup, it's probably of this first type. So they probably participate in a simultaneous lineup, which involves presenting all of the choices at the same time. So the witness is shown all of the options and is simply asked which of these people committed the crime. Now, this sounds like a reasonable way to do things, so why is this an issue? Well, one issue is that if one person stands out, such as person number 2 in this example, who has a different color background, the witness might be more likely to select that person as a perpetrator, regardless of whether the witness saw that person at the crime scene or not. Another issue is that this type of lineup encourages the witness to make relative judgments, to sort of ask themselves, who here looks most like the person I saw? Sometimes the police even say, does anyone look familiar? Or does anyone here look like the perpetrator? If the perpetrator is present in the lineup, then this shouldn't be an issue, as presumably the perpetrator would be the person in the lineup that looks most like the perpetrator. However, when the perpetrator is not in the lineup, this method encourages the selection of an innocent person who looks most like the perpetrator. So this is the major issue, and this is one of the topics addressed in the 60 Minutes video. If the police have the wrong suspect, then an innocent person in the lineup who resembles the perpetrator is likely to be chosen, creating an error in eyewitness memory. And of course, if police have the wrong suspect in custody, it's probably going to be someone that looks a lot like the perpetrator. So what should police do instead? Well, the recommendation is to use sequential lineups, which involves presenting the choices one at a time. So instead of seeing all 6 faces at once, the eyewitness is shown each person one at a time. They then have to decide if that person was the perpetrator before seeing any more faces. And so, they'd be shown person number 1 and asked, is this person the perpetrator? If the eyewitness ever says yes, the lineup ends. But if the eyewitness says no, then the second person is shown all by himself. Again, the eyewitness is asked, is this person the perpetrator? If the eyewitness says no, the lineup continues and the third person is shown. This continues until the eyewitness picks someone or the eyewitness says no to all 6 faces. The difference between simultaneous and sequential lineups, then, is that sequential lineups encourage the witness to make absolute judgments. That is, to ask themselves, is this the actual person I saw? Remember, simultaneous lineups encourage the witness to select the person who looks most like the perpetrator, potentially an innocent suspect if the perpetrator isn't in the lineup. In sequential lineups, though, because the eyewitness only ever sees one face at a time, the eyewitness is forced to decide whether that person is the actual perpetrator or not. The main advantage of sequential lineups, then, is that they reduce the rate of an innocent person being selected when the perpetrator is absent from the lineup. In one study, when the suspect was not in the lineup, an innocent person was falsely identified 43% of the time in the simultaneous lineup condition, but only 17% of the time in the sequential lineup condition. The next thing I'll mention is the verbal overshadowing effect, which says that participants are less likely to recognize a person in a lineup after giving a verbal description of that person. That is, you might think that asking a witness to verbally describe the perpetrator would improve their memory, as it's providing a retrieval attempt. However, in one study, participants watched a video of a bank robbery and were placed into a control condition or a description condition where they were asked to spend about 5 minutes describing the person who committed the crime. Then, all participants were shown an 8-person lineup, and the finding was that those in the description condition were less likely to identify the perpetrator. And finally, there's even some evidence to suggest that creating a composite sketch of the suspect impairs identification of that person in a lineup. In one study, all participants watched a video of a crime and then were divided into one of 3 groups: a control group, a composite building group that made a composite sketch of the perpetrator, or a yoked group that saw another person's composite sketch of the perpetrator. This would be equivalent to a person who sees a composite sketch of a suspect on the news. The finding was that those participants who created a composite sketch were less accurate at identifying the perpetrator. Okay, well that's all I have for you today. Again, don't forget to watch the 60 Minutes videos posted on Canvas, and note that the chapter reading on forgetting is posted on Canvas and isn't from the textbook.